G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of Lead on Purpose. My name's James Middleton and for the last 20 years I've led teams of all shapes and sizes, from the Australian Air Force through to the private sector. From complex operational environments to high trust industries where precision, accountability and purpose really matter. These days I help organisations build ethical, purposeful leadership at every level, and I help you become the leader that you want to be. I explore real-world leadership challenges, bring you inspiring stories from experienced leaders, and give you practical strategies to help you lead with confidence, clarity, and purpose. On today's episode, I'm chatting with Alison Inglis. G'day, Alison. Thank you very much for joining me on Lead on Purpose. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you, Mitzi. It's very exciting to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you're excited. It's been a little while since we worked together, but I'm always keen to see what you're up to. So I know a lot about your career journey, but for everyone else out there, can you just give us a bit of a quick rundown on who is Alison Inglis? What's your career journey been like?
Sure, I can. I'm currently the Executive Director of Strategy and Sales for Department 13, which is a fabulous little Australian counter UAS SME. So getting right into that sovereign capability, which is great. Just prior to that, and where we worked together, I was at Raytheon Australia, where I worked as their industry engagement director for 5 years. So quite a stint, and got to work with obviously hundreds of SMEs in that space as well. So lots of Australian businesses. I think this is going to be the theme throughout the working with lots of small Australian businesses. So the role that I held prior to Raytheon was I was at Benchon, which is a veteran-owned, another Australian SME owned by Tim Wormsey, who I think you probably know. So
Yep, absolutely. I know Tim.
Yeah, so they're doing a bunch of good work, sort of matching the Australian companies to the available work and creating some pretty good stuff there in the supply chains for the primes. So good on them as well. Before that, I'm just trying to think. I was at Northrop Grumman before that, so I went from Northrop to Benchon. So at Northrop Grumman, I did a similar kind of role to the role that I did at Raytheon. A little bit more in the strategy and capture space, so working in the sort of really early phases for a capture team there in Northrop Grumman. And then prior to that, and I think that's probably getting pretty far back in my career, but prior to that, I worked for MBDA, which is a European missile company. So plenty of breadth there, I think, in defense.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it seems to be that there's almost like this seesaw or like ping pong between big company, small company, big company, small company. But I can see from what you said, your focus has always been on the SMEs, the small to medium enterprise. So a lot of experience in defense industries there. Is that something that has always been a focus of your career?
No, it definitely hasn't. So I don't have a military background or an engineering background or anything like that. I very, very randomly, I would say, ended up in defense industry, but actually just love it. I applied for a job that had no company attached to it, just online. And by the time I found out that it was at a missile company, which was well out of my comfort zone at the time, I'd already done sort of like 4 really intense interviews and a psychometric testing. So I thought, yeah, okay, I'll give this a crack. Now I've got it. And actually just loved it. I love the people in defense industry. I love the sort of capability and the smart people that you get to work with. So it's really interesting, I think.
I think that's a really interesting way to get into defense industry, because I think a lot of people think about, it's always, you've always loved the military, you've always loved planes. I mean, I've always loved planes, but that's not why I joined the Air Force, all those years ago. But to find yourself with that opportunity without kind of realizing that it was that opportunity.
Yeah.
How did that come about, that opportunity with no company attached?
So I was actually literally working in health just prior to working into defense industry. So I was working in health industry, and I was just, like when you get to a point where you've been in a job for a while, you've kind of done all of the challenges. Certainly for me, I'm always looking for new challenges. Once I've kind of achieved all those challenges and it's business as usual, I start looking for the next challenge. So I feel like I was working in health and I thought, oh, I'll apply for this job. It looks really interesting. Looks like, something I could really get my teeth into. And then, randomly realized it was in defense industry. Had a bit of a like internal conniption about going from health to going to defense, especially with no military background. It was quite confronting for a while there to think about like, oh, do I want to be involved in this? Do I actually want to support this kind of industry? And I thought, oh, you know what? I'll give it a go. If I hate it, can always leave. And I didn't love it. So still here.
That's awesome. So it is a really interesting line of thought, because it is hard to think about, oh, well, that's what do defense companies do? Missile companies, aircraft companies, companies that build infantry fighting vehicles. So you said you love defense industry. What is it about defense industry and the people and what defense industry does that hooked you, that made you stay for so long?
Look, honestly, I feel like this is something perhaps that's really interesting as a civilian sort of coming into this environment. But the sort of ex-military people, the people who have worked together for years and they've literally put themselves in life and death situations together, they've been through trauma, they've built these bonds. They just have this amazing camaraderie, I guess, that if you are able to be lucky enough to find yourself trusted in that space and let into that space, as a civilian, it's an incredible experience that you just wouldn't get the opportunity to be part of something like that. Right now, that said, you never really, you're never really fully in. It's not like you deployed or you've got any of that background, but the people will let you into that sort of trusted environment. And then when you're trusted, you're really trusted. So I like this. And they're smart, right? Smart people.
Oh, I don't know about all of them, but we'll call it what it is. So is trust, in that case, you said that the trust is a big part of it and why you really like to be in those organizations or those environments. What's been your experience of trust through your life that has caused you to identify with that so much?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's when you have those really high trust environments, I guess those high trust teams or in any high trust environment, really, the outcomes that you get are significantly better than the outcomes you'll get in sort of combative environments. In my opinion, I think that I'm really keen on the sort of like collaborative environments. So high trust is required to get that real collaboration. You have to be, if you don't trust your team, if you don't have that psychological safety, I guess, in your team, then you won't get those really good outcomes. People have to feel safe to speak up and not feel like they're going to be looked down on or thought of as stupid or anything like that. So I feel like I like high trust environments, and anything that sort of speeds that process up, I'm keen on. I'm very keen on.
I completely agree. One thing that I really found challenging when I left the Air Force is this fear that I would go into these environments and there wouldn't be trust, because I'd heard people go out and get into big consulting firms or big accounting firms where it's, dog eat dog, and you'll step on anyone you can to get higher. And it's like, that just doesn't gel with me, but I did find the same in a lot of ways coming out from uniform and then working in defense industry. The vast majority of the time I was working around people that I really did trust and trusted me, and we could build a very high functioning or high performing environment around those seeds of trust. So I'm glad you feel it too, because it is part of the lifestyle for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think it's readily available in other industries. I've worked in other industries, right? So health is another industry where obviously they they need to trust each other, and they do trust each other. So, but again, I was kind of like on the outside of that. So I'm not in the operating theater. I'm not working as a doctor. But you sort of get brought into that environment where they are high trust. So if you are trusted, you sort of get a higher level of trust than you would ordinarily. And I think, so I feel like high trust teams are really, really important to me personally, as you sort of build them. But yeah, you get high performance out of them for sure, I reckon.
That's absolutely true. I couldn't agree more that trust is the foundation for high performance, because without it, no one's going to put their hand up to take a risk. No one's going to put their hand up and say, "Oh, I don't understand," or I stuffed up. So it is critical to that high performance. So when you and I worked together, I worked for you. You were my leader in my introduction to the Australian industry capability space, and I did learn so much from you around the importance of building up and taking the risk on Australian industry, particularly for national security, particularly for local prosperity, and veteran-owned businesses. Love to work in defence industry. I'm one of them, because we just still feel so connected to that environment. So, with your career, spending a lot of time in and around defence industry with a lot of military people, what has your experience of leadership been like, both for you as a leader and your experience of leadership coming back your way?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting for me, right? Because when you've got teams that are comprised of a lot of veterans, ex-military, they've all been given a certain set of leadership tools. They really have, right? It's really critical for the leadership in the Defence Force to be consistent and hierarchical, and there is very real and valid reasons for that. I would say, in my civilian opinion, I'll just put that in there. I'm not ex-military. I think we've got that clear. But there is a certain set of sort of leadership standards that come through. And one of the things in defence industry that's always really interesting to me is that people who end up in leadership roles as civilians with military people, ex-military people working for them, sometimes there can be like a little bit of I wouldn't say it's like a clash, but the need for, so for me, for example, and I think you'd agree with this, the need for hierarchy just isn't really there. I don't feel like this is one of my one of my leadership quirks, right? Like this is what we've spoken about before. I'm actually like really, really deeply uncomfortable with what I would call performative leadership, right? Now, is defense industry performative leadership? Not always, not really. There are absolutely really good leaders working in defense industry, right? But I guess that I don't personally enjoy that authority and hierarchy just for its own sake, right? I don't feel the need to posture my position over other people's position. It's never been required. There's no life or death situation that I've been in where I need to hold that command really, really quickly. So I think respect to me is probably earned a bit differently, and it's sort of through consistency and fairness over time. I will say I do think what I'm going to call them high caliber people, maybe a little a little intentionally, but I think what I mean by high caliber people is people who are confident in their abilities, people who are not insecure, people who are they're certain that what they're doing is right, and they have a high level of technical skill. Right? That's what I'll call it. That's what I kind of mean by high caliber people.
Yep, makes sense to me.
I engage with those people really, really readily, really, really easily. I find that their need for consistency and fairness matches my need for consistency and fairness. Where I really struggle, and this is sort of going back to that performative leadership, is where people who are more concerned with status than with substance, that is where I really struggle, right? So that's something I'm still working on, like understanding that certain, not every leader that I run into is going to be super keen to hear my thoughts. I'm always keen to hear other people's thoughts because I want to improve, and I don't look at it necessarily as that kind of personal attack in any way, shape, or form. I'm like, oh, great, you've discovered a problem. Let's fix the problem. And it's more like a data point to me. But what I have found is that is not the case for everyone, and I need to sort of manage that a little bit better myself. That's a lesson I'm still learning, though, Mitzi.
Now, I totally understand what you mean. My opinion in all this is that the vast majority of people in so-called leadership positions, which are actually just positions of rank and authority in the military, rely on that rank and that imposed authority rather than competence and collaboration and trust. Whereas in the corporate world, well, I don't have to listen to the person who is, above me, because unlike in the military, they can't charge me and send me to prison for not doing what they say, right? So I can see how that would be. I've observed it myself. So with I love what you said there about performative leadership. So can you just help me understand, when you talk about performative leadership, what does that look like?
To me, performative leadership is sort of people who are keen to just sort of like over signal their authority, right? So people who will make sure you're very aware of what their status is. You're very aware of their importance in the structure of the organization, right? So that I don't know, I'm like the terror for these people because I just don't. I just don't have it. I feel I'm like, oh, okay, great. That's excellent. Oh, you're the MD. Fantastic. Well done, you. Well, it won't stop me from speaking my mind, much to my own career limiting decisions sometimes, as we know. But I think it's important. It's important to be true to yourself.
Like I can see as you're talking, there's this, and explain to me a bit more about your career. I can feel this common theme where I believe that it's more about getting it right together, doing what needs to be done for the best outcome rather than you necessarily being right or someone else being right. Would I be reasonable in saying that?
Yeah. I think definitely. I am happy to be wrong if you can explain to me why I'm wrong, and I can sort of see that. I think sometimes it gets a bit tricky as a leader, right? Because sometimes you might be under time constraints and you might have someone more junior, and obviously in my high trust teams I build, people are very comfortable coming forward to me with their concerns, right? And I welcome that. I've got no problems with that. What can happen, like where that can go a little bit awry, I think, is when you know that they're wrong, you understand the arc that they're sort of going through, you understand it's really important for their learning to understand why. You'd love to give them a bunch of rope to go find out for themselves and fix it after, but you just don't have the time, right? So I think sometimes, particularly that would happen in capture teams, for example, where sometimes people are like, oh, we should do this, it'll be great. And I'm like, I love that you think it will be great. The corporate realities we're going to come up against are going to be insurmountable in the time frame that we have. Therefore, I'm going to say, nope, we're not doing that now. We're just not going to do that. And I might not have time to sort of, give the team a full explanation of why I'm making that decision. I think I think I would say I was pretty good at coming back to teams after and being like, hey, what did we learn? Where was everyone's rub points? Like, where did you feel unheard? Or like, where do you want to know more? Or sort of explaining those decisions. I feel like I'm pretty good at that. You can tell me. You work for me.
No, I recall that absolutely. There's so much time pressure in those environments that you reach a point where, okay, great idea, but the good idea cutoff line was 2 weeks ago. So how do you in those circumstances as a leader where you want to foster this environment of high performance and trust and collaboration, how do you manage and how do you build that environment while still knowing that you have to tell people to just, put it away for now?
Yeah, okay. I feel like there's a couple of things here that are pretty critical, right? So we spoke about high trust teams before. I think there's a really, really critical point about high trust teams that I've learned, certainly I've experienced, and that is that high trust teams are genuinely built by what you don't tolerate as opposed to what you do. Super happy to be supportive to my teams, but I think I'm genuinely comfortable addressing underperformance. And I think I personally will address underperformance relatively quickly because I genuinely don't think there's anything more corrosive to high performing teams or high performing individuals than allowing other people to get away with things. I think that just erodes trust so much faster than any hard conversation that you have to have as a leader, right? So I feel like in your teams, if you want high trust teams, you set the standard for what's not tolerated. And you don't let people get away with things, because I feel like regardless, like especially in those high pressure environments, though, your teams are like watching you. They're watching you really closely as a leader. They're like, what do you, it's not even necessarily what you say, it's what you will allow, right? Like what you'll permit to happen in your team. Now, where that gets a bit tricky is sometimes, as a leader, if you're not like the super senior leader, sometimes what you will permit in your team is different to what the organization will permit, right? And that's where you get those real rub points where you end up in a situation where you're balancing those corporate requirements that are expected of you at your position, like there's certain things you can't say or you can't do or whatever, but you have this really open team. And so I've just always tried to balance that by being really genuinely honest with my teams and letting them know what I can, and then letting them know that there's more to come, but I can't say anything yet, right? Like, stand by. But yeah, I think high trust teams are mostly built by what you don't tolerate, as opposed to how you sort of treat people. I don't know.
I think that's the side of innovation and high performance that people don't often see. There's always a lot of talk about innovation being, okay, people need to be free to express ideas and challenge the status quo and make mistakes, and absolutely. Yeah. But if you continue to tolerate the same mistakes over and over again,
yeah.
Well, what does that say about your commitment to high performance, right?
Yeah. You've got to be clear, right? Like clarity. I feel like clarity is kind, but it needs accountability, right? So I feel like when you have leaders that are a bit ambiguous in how they sort of deal with issues or deal with problems, or it can feel like the polite thing to do to be ambiguous about people's behavior or the standards of their behavior or their performance or whatever it is. People are ambiguous about how they deal with these things. But again, I think this is one of these things that it's really corrosive in high performance environments. And like, if you do work in that sort of strategy capture business, any sort of business development environment, it is a high performance environment. It's highly competitive, right? So expectations need to be explicit. Otherwise, people are just filling the gaps with their assumptions, and then resentment builds, right? Like, people get really, really resentful, and it might not even be true. It's because there's an information gap there, or there's a big hole and it's not addressed and it's ambiguous. They don't know what's happening, and they're like, they make stuff up. I almost did a swear. I didn't.
People rarely fill in the gaps and make assumptions for the best case scenario, right? It's always the worst, because that's a protective factor. We always want to think, okay, if I can deal with the worst case scenario, anything else is better. So can I ask, is there a leader or someone that you worked with early on in your career or throughout your career that that you saw these same ideals reflected back at you that helped you establish who you were going to be as a leader?
Oh yeah, I've been really lucky, and I've got to work with some really really good leaders, right? So I would say um, when I was at MBDA, I'll stick to defense industry. I've worked with leaders in my earlier career as well, but I think most of your audience is probably going to be defense industry, right? But um, I don't know. I don't know if I should name him. He's still very much in defense industry. But I have a lot of respect for him. So maybe I will. We'll cut it if you need to. But one of the most transformational leaders that I've ever got to work with, and it wasn't super directly either, is his name is Steve Wadey. And I think he's currently the managing director of Kinetic in UK, right? And but I got to work with him when he was the managing director of MBDA via the Australian office. So he was in the UK, changing up the business from that perspective. And I was working in the new Australian office. I think his approach, he's probably a lot tougher, I would say, or he's a lot clearer. Let's say he's got a lot more clarity about things and a lot less ambiguity even than I do. And he certainly seems to believe in accountability for people, but he has a real knack of sort of setting a strategy and then defining how it's going to be executed and then exciting people, right? Exciting people so they feel this is excellent. This journey is brilliant. I want to come on this journey, and they really come along with him, or they don't, right? So it gets really divisive. So he has this real knack of sort of bringing, I would say, the vast bulk of the company along with him, which means he executes things really, really well. And then the ones that sort of fall away, they probably weren't going to be a good fit in the new model anyway. So it's probably it's probably that role fit. I don't know. It's good to get people out of the roles if they're not if they're not going to cope really well.
Well, if you can be really clear about what the expectations are, you can get buy-in across the organization to hold each other accountable to those expectations. You have a really clear picture. Well, if that creates the opportunity for some people to self-select out, I think that's better for everyone. Because it doesn't weigh everyone down because they're now complaining and planting the seeds of discontent. But they're also like, okay, well, I know clearly that this isn't a fit for me, so I can go take another opportunity. So I think it can be mutually beneficial in that way.
They usually have a bit of a whinge first, though, on their way out. And then
always.
Then they'll head off. And then I would say the other leader that I've had that had a massive impact on me, and he also still works in Australian defence industry, but that's Richard Farkashazi, who I worked for at Northrop Grumman. He is still hands down my favourite boss I've ever had, and I think it's really where I learnt the value of autonomy, if that makes sense, of allowing people to be autonomous. I think before Richard, my autonomy had been fairly limited. Like I understand as a person, I can be quite nerve-wracking for the senior levels of the company, right? But I'm not. I'm actually pretty solid, and I think Richard was probably the first leader that I had who was like, no, you got this. Like, here's the outcome I want. Just go do it. Go tell me what you want to do. And so I really learnt the value of offering that to people in teams, right? Because that really, really allowed me to go and be innovative, to try different approaches, to not be so constrained by structure, to offer him ideas and, things that were like not normal, right? Like, oh, maybe if we do it this way, and he'll be like, well, okay, we didn't really think of that, but okay, give it a crack, see what happens, right? And I think that that's probably something that I've really carried through with me. Like I said, unless you're in that really, really high pressure environment of, nope, we just got to get this done now, I feel like I do let my teams go and have a crack. I'm like, oh, you got an idea, you want to go try? Bring it, let's see what happens. we'll see. We'll see how we go. But the other thing I learned from him is if you're going to do that for people, because, obviously, it's a big corporate environment. If you are going to allow people to be really autonomous in an environment that's really quite rigid and structured, which tends to be the case for most large corporates, you also, as their manager, have to be fully prepared to be like, yep, I let them do that. Right? Like, that's the safety aspect of it, So again, making sure people aren't doing anything too wild, but keeping abreast of how they're going with it, sort of stepping in if there's any major issues before all hell breaks loose, maybe. But, it's good. It's good to let people go.
It is, and that's a real challenge. That's why I think delegation is such a skill, and it's something you can learn, and you have to learn and practice and get better at over time, because exactly like you said, well, effective delegation is, we want to achieve this. You have the authority to do it. This is your scope of influence. This is your authority. This is where you don't go. This is where you do go. But how are we going to do it? And you empower those people to make those decisions to make that happen. But delegation doesn't mean abdication.
No, and that's right.
If it goes poorly, the buck still stops with you as the leader. You may have delegated execution, but you are still responsible for the good, the bad, or the otherwise, and you have to be comfortable owning that. And that is, I think, one of the fundamental barriers to people delegating is like, well, I don't want to stake my reputation on someone else's performance because I don't feel comfortable. Therefore, I'm going to try to do everything myself, which doesn't work for anyone. Doesn't work for anyone any of the time, really.
Whereas I genuinely do feel comfortable staking my reputation on my teams because I've trained them, and if they fail, that's on me, right? Like that's your job. That's your job as their manager. If you haven't trained them well enough and they do a big fail, 100%, that's on you as their manager. You didn't check in enough. You didn't give them enough guidance. You didn't give them enough direction. They weren't empowered to come back and ask you questions. Whatever it is, I feel like 99% of the time, it's the fault of the manager, the senior person, right? If something goes horribly awry, that I'm going to give myself 1% grace, because every now and again you do get an employee or a staff member or a team member that just does something really, really rogue, right? Which is really hard to predict.
Yep, you do. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, well, then they're still in your team, what have you done with that person? So it is absolutely a challenge. You're exactly right. I completely agree that it does come back to leadership. If someone has made a mistake or hasn't performed or hasn't delivered something the way you were hoping it was, well, reflect on yourself. Is it what's happened here? What direction did I give you? Did I create the clarity? Did what I believe I said and what you heard, are they the same thing? And there's so much room for error, which is why it's something that you just need to keep working on, because it's not a set and forget. So you get, from what I'm getting from you said earlier, it's about standards and trust and consistency and clarity. And if you set to me it sounds like you're setting those conditions early on. And you're doing all that work so that when it comes time for execution, well, there's nothing left to do but do the job.
Yeah, 100%. So I feel like this is, I don't think I'm not a compassionate person. I feel like on a human level, I'm a genuinely compassionate person. I think I like to give people context, right? Give people grace, like what's happened. If someone's performing poorly and ordinarily they're a really high performer, what's going on, right? There's context. There's going to be context there. Something's gone awry. What's happening? I think, like, from a leadership level, though, it's about patterns and recognizing those kind of patterns, right? So if someone is normally very, very high performing or very, very anything, right? Like they're always doing their stuff. They're very conscientious. They're very driven. And then suddenly they're not, like, something else has happened. So you give that person some space, right? But if that actually continues, your empathy, you can't lower your standards just based on empathy, right? Because then that becomes, again, very corrosive to the team. But I think you can definitely really care very deeply about someone on a sort of personal or human level, and still come to the conclusion that this role or team or environment is just not right for you anymore.
It's something that we come across as a challenge when we run the workshops we run, is that there is a big focus on empathetic leadership, and empathy is so important. It requires a lot of emotional intelligence. You need to be able to have these relationships, because leadership influence is built on relationships. That's how trust forms, and that's how we work together. That's how we put our hand up and say, hey boss, you really didn't hit the mark today. You're not living up to your own standard. But the question then is, well, when does a personal issue, like you talked about here, if something's changed, well, there's probably a personal issue there. When does a personal issue become a professional issue?
Correct.
When it starts affecting their performance at work.
When it starts affecting their performance at work over an extended period of time that is not fair for the team to carry, right? Like teams will carry their teammates, especially if you've got that high trust team, right? People will rally around. You can be like, oh, so-and-so is having a bit of a hard time. This happened. And in a high trust team, that team will jump in, right? They'll be like, oh, what can I do? What can I take off them? What can I do to support? But that can only, people get burnt out if that is constant, and it never goes away.
Right. If it's built on a foundation of empathy, but you still need clarity and consistency, clarity of expectation, clarity of standard, but then consistency in upholding those, not just from leadership down, but within the team. We all need to hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
So exactly. I think it goes back to what you said all the way at the beginning about this. Well, clarity. It's clarity and consistency. That's what leadership is built on, and that's how trust builds. I'm going to ask you the question that I ask all the guests on the podcast here. Can you tell me about a time when you, as a leader, realized you were part of the problem, and what did you do about it?
I think I naturally think in sort of patterns or second order effects. The big arcs, like a big strategy. It's an advantage, right? It's an advantage strategically. Where that really falls over is I really, really need to slow down sometimes, sort of explain what I'm thinking. Sometimes I feel like my team can feel like they've been really left behind by me, and they're sort of scrambling and struggling to keep up. Like, how did you make that leap? What does that mean? They're not slower per se. I've just made these, I might have learned something 6 months ago. My brain just happens to be really, really good at holding all these disparate data points. And then at some point I'll be like, oh my God, it all collapsed. And then I'm like, this is the correct course of action. And everyone's like, wait, what? Why is that the correct course of action? And I'm like, I actually don't know how to explain this. I'll know for sure. 100%. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm actually correct or not correct. 100% I'm correct. This is the correct course of action, right? So making sure the corporate speak for it, of course, is bringing people on the journey. I don't love that phrase. I don't want to bring people on the journey. My teams are really smart. They're really high performing. What I have to remember is they're operating almost at a different Zoom level. I've posed this problem at here is an execution problem. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, but strategically this. And they haven't necessarily, they're just operating in a different space.
But how would you proactively overcome that with your team to reduce that gap between their knowledge of execution and strategy?
I did actually put something in place for this, and you can tell me whether or not it ended up being effective, right? So because this was a big ongoing problem for me and I had access to strategic information that I felt like the team wasn't necessarily privy to. One, I made specific and significant, I think, time to ensure that every single person on my team had an understanding of how their role contributed strategically to our team's goals, to what we were going to do, how that then rolled up strategically into the broader function, and then how that then contributed strategically to the company's goals from a broad Australian perspective, and then took it even a step further and aligned it to some of those broader parent company perspectives from the US. That was one mechanism that I used to kind of address this, so that when people felt like they had a good grasp of their own strategic value, suddenly when you're talking about things in a journey, they're like, oh, hey, I know what my role is in that. Like I do this part.
And I mean, the statistics show that over the last 10 years, 9 out of 10 companies of all shapes and sizes have failed to deliver on their strategic goals. And a big part of that comes down to the fact that there is this huge disconnection between, oh, that's strategic and that's operational and that's day to day. Well, if they're not connected, what are you doing as an organization, right? There is no clarity for people. So people will just go and do what's in their best interests. And then they'll be unhappy and they'll plant those seeds and they'll start white anting and just drag everyone down with them. So what you're doing there on that scale is going, well, if I can draw a line from what I'm doing right now through to where the company or the country wants to be in 5 to 10 years, great. Yeah. I've got that connection to a greater purpose. And that means I can act in accordance with that greater purpose rather than just floundering around trying to look busy, which is it's incredibly difficult to do, but it's so essential.
I think it's really, and again, it's just not, maybe I was just less experienced when I worked out of defense industry as well, but I actually think creating that that alignment, that purpose for people, particularly people who've served in the military, they have a real purpose, right? They had a real purpose. They had a calling, if you like, to go and serve the country. It's really, it can get really difficult moving into industry from what I've seen, sort of maintaining that sense of purpose. And I think giving people that alignment can be really helpful. Again, there's one of those intrinsic motivators, right? Like what motivates you. Some people it's accountability, some people it's purpose.
Of all the things you've learned, what is something that stands out to you that has served you well in every leadership situation or leadership challenge you found yourself in?
Wow, that's a big question. I think this actually didn't come from any of my jobs per se. This actually came from my sister-in-law. So my sister-in-law she's a very successful senior executive, and sort of as I was sort of moving up the ranks, I remember one time I reached out to her and I was like, oh my God, like what do I do here? Like how do I do this? And she's like, oh well, the best lesson. She learned a couple of good lessons. She had a couple of good lessons for me, but she's like, the most important lesson that I've learned is to assume positive intent. And I think that is actually really, really important, right? Particularly when you're dealing with emails or people are sending you a Teams message or a Slack or whatever you use in your organization. If you assume positive intent from people, you sort of come at things a different way. If you're not having that mindset, you can really get into trouble really quickly. So that's something that it was very useful for me to hear that from someone, because I don't think that that's something that I did naturally, right? I feel like I'm a very feisty individual just in general, and so my natural reaction is to think, oh, they're fighting me, they want to have a fight. So we're on, right? We're on. And she was like, you don't have to, you can just assume positive intent. Now that doesn't mean people's intentions are always positive, right? But I think from the outset, if you're sort of starting off from that place, it allows you to not react as quickly, and it perhaps allows you to take a moment and respond, as opposed to having an instant reaction. But yeah, I feel like that's probably one of the more interesting lessons I've learned.
If you assume positive intent, well, that's the foundation of trust. And I think it's important as a leader to give trust freely, but don't be made a fool of when people continue to abuse your trust, but give it freely and strengthen it over time.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So thank you very much, Alison, for taking the time to chat to me. I really appreciate it. I know you're flat out busy, and I am really, really excited to see where you and Department 13 go over the next few years.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's been really fun. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining Alison and I on today's episode of Lead on Purpose. If today's episode gave you something to think about, or maybe a light bulb moment, let me know about it down in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who's ready to become a better leader. And remember, leadership isn't a title, it's a choice. So make that choice and continue leading on purpose. My name's James, and I'll see you next time.